Yeah, like I was saying. So yeah, so shit. It was he got a lot of notoriety because of that. Keep in mind, this just for perspective purposes. You know what I'm saying? He was a dark skinned person. He's darker than me. You know what I'm saying? So he got invited to New York, and the flag commander, Samuel Francis DuPont, he vetoed it. He rejected the invite for him to go to New York. He wanted Robert Smalls to continue to work for them, for the Navy, because of his knowledge and what that could continually bring forth. And, you know what I'm saying? And, like, it could be a big assistance to them. So he vetoed that. Now, later on, another person, a part of the American Missionary Association that was only, like, created, like, about 10 years before that. I think in 1856 or something like that. 1856, 1854. Anyway, a reverend, a part of this he was sent by this organization. His name was Reverend Mansfield. What was it? French. I dropped my cigarette. Shit. Might as well show it. I ain't tripping. Yeah, Reverend Mansfield French. So, General David Hunter. Now he's important. I'm going to speak on him further in a second. You know, he encouraged Robert Smalls to go ahead and take the invite to go to Washington with him. That's where, because the Reverend wanted to take him to Washington so they could, make an argument and try to help convince Abraham Lincoln to allow slaves to enlist in the army or whatnot. So, as far as like when them going to Port Royal, the reason why they went there is because they was trying to help, the slave contraband there, trying to like educate them or help them get on their feet, shit like that. Like I said before, actually I didn't mention it in chapter 2. I read about it, but I forgot to mention it. Like all across various pockets where these contrabands is going to, they ended up becoming contraband camps and then snowball into like schools and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? So Port Royal was one of those. So he was encouraged by General David Hunter to go. He decided to go, and then they went to Washington and met up with Edward Stanton. I mentioned him in chapter 2 as well. Edward Stanton and did I mention him in chapter 2 or was it chapter 1? No, chapter 2. Edward Stanton, the Secretary of Defense. He was the Secretary of Defense for 6 years, from 1862 to 1868, throughout the entire Civil War, basically. You know what I'm saying? Past it, actually. 3 years past it. So they went to go meet with them, and they spoke with them. And Abraham Lincoln ended up, later on that month, because they went in August. I'm kind of mixing it up a little bit. Not just to enlist, but to have like men from I forget exactly, but I believe it was in South Carolina. What was it? I forget. But basically, okay, to have men enlist in David Hunter's army, because what had happened before this, right? Okay, now I got to go back to explain a little bit more, give a little bit more context. I'm actually going to bring this up. Okay, we're going to start with, there's another guy, Charles John Fremont, all right? Now, because I'm bringing it up, I might as well go further as far as like my personal opinion about Abraham Lincoln's perspective pertaining to slavery, but more so, because that's already like, that's settled. But more so like his reason for fighting the war, why he was not fighting the war to end slaves. That's not to say that he did not want slavery to end eventually. I'm saying like his whole fucking justification for fighting the war was not to end slavery. Again, his attitude toward black people, that's already settled. No need to get too loquacious about that. Now, we're going to start with Charles John Fremont. Okay, this happened in mid-1861, all right? Abraham Lincoln had assigned him to the Department of the West. It consisted of some of those territories I mentioned already, but definitely Illinois, Missouri, Western Kentucky, and then New Mexico. That territory, that was ceded to the United States during the Mexican American after the Mexican American War in 1848. Okay, so that's the areas that he was given to fight or have control over and try to et cetera, et cetera. What ended up happening? Okay, he was appointed by Abraham Lincoln himself in July 31st. Okay, this guy was supposed to be, I don't want to just say rambunctious, I want to say insubordinate. Like like he did a lot of things without permission that you were supposed to do. And like, for example, executing rebel soldiers and shit like that. Like that's an act that's like a what you call that? Like a war crime or whatnot. Remember, like during chapter 2, I brought it up about how Edward Stanton put something out there like, okay, since y'all executing our black soldiers, it's a war crime, we're going to do the same to your white soldiers and also put them in labor. You're not supposed to do that. He ended up doing that without notifying Abraham Lincoln or the Army Commission, etc. And then he went further. Now, this is the highlight part right here. This speaks to Lincoln. This is 1861. The very next month, August 30th. All right, that's when he he created an order called the Emancipation Edict or something like that, but specifically for Missouri, the state of Missouri. Remember, Missouri was one of those states that still that was like one of those states out of the 4 states, a part of the Union that still had slavery, a part of the Constitution. I mentioned that for a reason. I'm going to explain as I go along. He put an order out there saying, basically any slave a part of the state. If you're fighting against the Union, by the way, because remember you got to keep in mind pockets within some of these states and shit like that, like South Carolina, for example. If you're fighting on the side of the Confederates or whatever, and whoever you are, if you have slaves, they're automatically considered free. He made that proclamation or declaration August 30th. Abraham Lincoln ended up finding about that, and then September 11th, he rescinded it. Basically, he made sure, like, he annulled it, basically. All right, and then a month after that, in October, I want to say October the 22nd, because of that and other things that he did, but a lot of it had to do with that. He took him, he demoted him, and he replaced him. He took him off of the Department of the West. And then another month after that, in November, that's when he disbanded the Department of the West. Now, just to add the flip side of the coin to this, I read further on this. This is the argument from some people. They were saying, like, okay, it's because Missouri was one of those 4 states, a part of the Union. They considered them border states, and it would be a big fucking risk to try to execute something like that, and we may end up losing the state, and they may go to the Confederacy. They did not want to lose any states at the time. Keep in mind, 11 on the side of the Confederacy, 22 on the side of the Union overall. These are 4 out of that 22: Missouri, Maryland, Kentucky, and Delaware. Now, keep that in mind. Okay. Now, we're going to go a year later. Don't forget about Charles John Fremont that I just mentioned. It's another guy, David Hunter, the person that encouraged Robert Smalls to go to Washington, right? Now, Abraham Lincoln had him rescinded the order August 30th, right? As far as Charles John Fremont. Only 5 days before that is when he signed he granted David Hunter's request, basically. Initial request. I'm going to get to David Hunter in a second. To go ahead and get 5,000 men from South Carolina, 5,000 slaves, train them, and then enlist them in the 1st South Carolina colored regiment, right? Keep that in mind. Now, going to David Hunter. Now, let me mention it again. The 25th is when Abraham Lincoln signed that, right? That was supposedly in part due to this meeting that Robert Smalls himself and that Reverend Mansfield French attended, and Edward Stanton was there. And just like with the 40 acres and shit from 3 states like Georgia and etc. He had it to where Rufus Sexton will help make that possible for these 5,000 slaves to be trained and then enlisted again into the 1st South Carolina regiment that David Hunter initially put together that Lincoln rescinded. Now, let me get to David Hunter. Now, keep those dates in mind.